Good afternoon. It's Friday the 13th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by David Scott with Northern Exposure. And of course, David reporting from north of the border. Health, we better start with, I think.
Well, the government has announced £66 million capital funding available to build and establish a national vaccine development and manufacturing centre, and a further £13 million available towards setting up a national medicines manufacturing and innovation centre. They're saying that the UK has strong expertise in researching new vaccines. However, there are gaps in our ability to develop, commercialise and manufacture new vaccines. Establishing a new national centre will bridge that gap, they say, and ensure that the UK is best set up for infectious disease outbreaks. It will also be able to provide expertise and advice to those working in the sector. So that's is that good news, Brian?
Well, I would have thought it was good news, but we did, of course, report yesterday that polio vaccines have been released, which were actually causing polio in children. So I'm a little bit more suspicious about vaccines than I might have been before yesterday. Can I just add to that somebody kindly pointed out to us that the BBC is now helping the government's vaccine policy by coming up with an app which is going to allow a much bigger survey to do with the population in UK and flu.
Yes, and in fact, it's okay, Brian, because the app, although it's tracking you and your movements and your interactions with other people, it'll do so anonymously. So don't worry about it.
Okay, well, there we are. And of course, remember that the BBC is entirely independent, and the BBC has said that we can trust its journalism because anybody who works for the BBC has been approved, and you can trust their information.
Good. Well, CNN, Brian, CNN, I think, takes the biscuit for the worst. It's really hard to describe how fake this news is. This is an exclusive that CNN published yesterday. Even Pokemon Go was used by extensive Russian-linked meddling effort.
Do they mean Pokemon himself?
Right. So this is apparently an exclusive, as I say, and they say that Russian efforts to meddle in American politics did not end at Facebook and Twitter. A CNN investigation of a Russian-linked account shows its tentacles extended to YouTube, Tumblr, and even Pokemon Go. One Russian-linked campaign posing as part of the Black Lives Matter movement used Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr and Pokemon Go, and even contacted some reporters in an effort to exploit racial tensions and sow discord. And apparently it was all to do with the IRA, but not the Irish Republican movement. No, this is the Internet Research Agency, which is apparently links right back to the Kremlin. David, I think I'll bring you in at this point and ask, how ridiculous does it have to get before these people just hide their heads in shame?
Worse, it would appear. I saw on YouTube, as little thing came up, CNN broadcasting live. I clicked on it last night, and it's just never-ending nonsense. They were again saying, well, Trump is literally Hitler, and they just go round and round and round with the same non-stories, trying to make a political point. It does have its comical side, but it's clearly an attempt to subvert the political process, exactly what they're accusing the Russians of doing, of course.
Shall we just mention that somebody has come into our chat room and pointed out that rather than Pokemon, it should be Putamon.
Yes, and Patrick Henningsen then this morning pointing at 21st Century Wire, pointing out that they're trying to get this narrative into the UK as well, of course, because, well, the headline here is Media's Blame Russia Smear Campaign now being used to discredit Corbyn and Labour. And really, it's just incredible. Trying to raise tensions over the possibility or the fact that British MPs are appearing on Russia Today, and therefore that is all about Russian interference in British politics as well.
But didn't we have young Stephen Kinnock, who was actually in Russia working in Moscow with one of the NGOs, eventually was asked to leave by the Russians because the Russians said, actually, what's going on here is effectively subversion. It's helping to destabilise Russia. So we've had British politicians working inside Russia
David?
Let's say a little word in favour of Russia today. There's a chap called Lionel Media, does a lot of commenting, and he's on Russia Today quite a lot, and he's on all sorts of mainstream channels in America, and indeed here. And he says that Russia Today is a bit different because you go on something like MSNBC or the BBC, and there's a huge pre-brief, right? They'll talk to you about what are you going to say, how are you going to say it, what the lines are you're going to follow. And they basically check everything you're going to say before they let you near the air. He said, Russia Today just phone them up and say, can you come on at 4:30? He says, yes. But we'll phone you at 4:15. Thank you very much. And that's it. They ask him nothing. He can go on there and he says exactly what he wants. It's far freer than the Western media. And of course, that's why we watch it.
I'll add to that, if I may, and they are very polite when you speak to them on the phone, unlike the BBC. Had that very unpleasant experience yesterday, just trying to talk to the BBC, and you were treated like a piece of dirt, I think is the correct expression.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to Syria and interesting developments this morning. This is a bit of video from Yusa Youssef from yesterday, from last night, showing Turkish troops rolling in across the Syrian border. Turkish forces have now apparently set up positions, as various mainstream media describing it, in Syria's Idlib region, observation posts, and this is part of a deployment aimed at containing the Kurdish forces in northern Syria. And apparently, at least Turkey says that this is done with the approval or acceptance, at least, of Russia and the Syrian government. So we need to wait and see how this develops. But interesting developments there. Brian, another day, another deepening military tie with a foreign power, because Britain and Poland now are in talks, or were in talks yesterday, over security and defence cooperation. Boris Johnson and Michael Fallon hosted the Polish foreign minister and their defence minister in London yesterday, and they were discussing areas of shared interest, including European security, joint work on the Western Balkans, and countering Russian influence in Eastern Europe. So they were discussing increasing military ties and cooperation. What they were actually discussing was EU military unification.
And not debated in Parliament. I noticed the gentleman on the far right of the picture is clearly playing Pokemon.
Yes, indeed. Let's move on then to Europol, because they have published this: recent trends in migrant smuggling. Criminal groups use life-endangering concealment methods, and they're saying that increasingly migrants are being pushed into sealed, airtight containers in vans, in vehicle engine compartments. The use of what they describe as leisure vehicles, sailing yachts, for smuggling operations is increasing. They've produced a few statistics here. They're saying that the number of people being smuggled via the Western Mediterranean through Spain has increased from 13,000 in 2016 to nearly 16,000 in 2017. But in the other two areas that they're monitoring, which is the Central Med and the Eastern Med, the numbers are falling. In the case of the Eastern Mediterranean, quite significantly. But they have more information. As you can see, the route through Italy is still quite significant. Yeah, although they're saying that people are increasingly using, as they say, leisure vehicles, leisure vessels. Sorry for this, whereas some of the stuff that we've shown in the past, that seems to be more substantial ships being used for that. So the migration situation continues, but increasingly people taking bigger risks to get here.
Bigger risks, and we will keep asking, where does the migration come from? Because of course these people have been displaced from their countries, either in an economic sense that they haven't got jobs, or because of the war that has flared up. And we've got major organisations, of course, boasting that we need a massive influx of people in order to help create the European superstate. So these people are clearly being used as political pawns, suffering on the way. This is very callous global political policy. We get in a bit deeper, it gets dirtier, of course, and we've got the Times here coming up and saying, well, actually, we've got a problem because Vietnamese children are now vanishing from council care. They just disappeared, but the Times reporter is pretty sure that these children are being trafficked and abused. Fascinating that the Times is on to the problem with Vietnamese children disappearing from care. They dropped the story of the 350 missing Syrian children pretty quickly. So this is just a cycle of stories about children being abused, but of course no follow-up journalism as to what this is really about. And the Times has been leading the charge in saying that former British Prime Minister Ted Heath, innocent of those charges that he was a child abuser. So I think this is fascinating stuff from the Times.
Well, I mean, of course, they've mentioned Vietnamese children in this case, but this is happening to children of all nationalities, including British children out of the care system. So, you know, they're kind of scraping the surface here, but they're not getting into any depth on this issue.
No depth at all. We'll come on to the children issue a little bit later in the news.
Right. Let's move on to the Bank of England. Now, Andy Haldane, who is the chief economist for the Bank of England, has begun his tour of, well, he's calling them town hall meetings. This is apparently an attempt to increase or improve communications between the bank and the general public. He has held a meeting in Cardiff and in Leicester so far, and today he was taking part in a debate on the public's trust in financial institutions. Do we have any trust in financial institutions?
Not at all.
No. He said that if the Bank of England had been fully transparent during the 2007-2008 crisis, then the crisis would have been a lot worse. So they weren't able to be transparent. They weren't able to be open about what's going on because that would have made matters a lot worse. And so he said it would have been equivalent to shouting fire in a crowded theatre. He said that it would have caused even greater hemorrhaging of confidence and greater collateral damage. He said sometimes you have to be a bit selective, you have to be a bit secretive. So that's okay. And he said that the Bank of England used to make too much out of its sort of, what did he say, mystique. Mystique was the word he used. But they're becoming more open now, so it's all fine.
More open, except when they don't want to be open because they judge that it could make matters worse.
Yes. Now, last week, David, we showed this graph, which is about British productivity, and we showed that since the 2007-2008 financial crisis, productivity has basically stagnated in this country. And the quote that we had was that UK labour productivity continued to lag behind our international partners in 2016. New innovative analysis suggests that this lower level of productivity was evident across all industries, although the size of the gap varies considerably. And during our discussion of this, David, we came to the conclusion that we didn't really know why this was. But the Financial Times today have a headline suggesting that they don't particularly know why this is either, because trying to make sense of the UK productivity puzzle is the headline. Well, the Bank of England has recently published this this is part of their wider efforts to communicate better with the public. This is from their education website, Lessons on a Plate, The Great Productivity Puzzle. So it seems to continue to be a puzzle, not just for us, but for all kinds of other people, including those that are supposed to know how to make sense of it.
Well, quite. Yeah, the Bank of England offer here 5 different explanations, and you rather have to take your pick of some or none. They're suggesting that firms hoarded workers, so that the economy declines, and rather than fire and then rehire with all the associated costs, firms trying to hold on to the workers and just sort of ride out the storm, which I'm sure there's a bit of that goes on in there, particularly with the government regulation on such things as redundancy, which makes it very difficult to change the size of the workforce. They then go weaker investment, cut the amount of capital per worker. Let's come back to that one in a minute if we may. Changes to composition of workforce. That presumably means lots of low-skilled people coming into the country, I guess. Capital and labour got stuck in weak businesses. Yes, this is zero interest rate policy. Zero interest rate policy allows zombie companies to struggle on when a healthy economy would liquidate those companies. Their assets would be bought up by other more efficient companies producing things that people actually want, and the economy would recover. But we're not having that because we've got zero interest rate policy. And then they also suggest that their own figures may be incorrect. So that's not a tremendously encouraging analysis of what's going wrong here. And they repeat this at length in speeches and in press releases, which you'll see here.
Well, in fact, it's incredible because the one on the left there, the UK productivity puzzle, that was published in 2014, and the news release on the right-hand side, which is again about the same thing, was published in 2015. So this is clearly something that they've been confused about for quite a number of years, and you would have thought that the resources of the bank, they would have managed to get to the bottom of it by now.
Yes, and the UK productivity puzzle paper there has got a very interesting chart that compares the current recession with all the previous ones going back to the 70s. And it shows that this is quite unique, that normally productivity picks up again quite quickly back onto the sort of long-term trend. So this is the first time this has happened. So can you think of anything, Mike, that's maybe happened now that we've never had before? That might be a place to start. Maybe something to do with the price of money and investment. It's zero interest rate policy. I mean, the thing that's unique is we've never had interest rates screwed to the floor for this length of time.
Well, let's just put that into perspective, because this is the Market Oracle UK interest rates economy GDP forecast 2016-2017, and they have this fantastic graph which really shows the reality of the situation. So interest rates in this country at 0.5%, well, since 2008. That's quite incredible.
Yeah. And that exactly corresponds with when the productivity slump started. And there can be reasons for this, because when you're talking about productivity, you're talking about capital investment. And it's real capital investment. You need the economy to be not consuming things, but deferring that consumption and taking those real resources and investing them in things like training and new plant and machinery and factories and things like that actually increase what we produce. Now, in a situation where the zero interest rate policy, there's no incentive to save. So you're not having real capital accumulation, and no amount of funny money printing will cover that reality. And is that not what we're now seeing? That without capital accumulation, you don't have productivity growth. And the difference between the long-term trend and where we're now at is 16%. What they're saying is that if we'd kept on trend, the whole country would be producing 16% more. We'd be 16% wealthier as a nation. So it's getting serious.
David, something I wanted to ask you was, how much of this do you think is clearly what you've just said is part of the puzzle, but how much of this do you think is just about the demoralization of people and the pessimism of people on an economic point of view? I mean, for example, we've got HS2. Now, I'm not going to suggest for one second that HS2 is a program that should be being built, because I don't think it's the right thing, but that's not the point. The point here is that over the course of since HS2 was announced, we've had article after article sort of bringing down British engineering and bringing down projects like this. This is typical of it from the National here. Government urged to axe White Elephant HS2 over claims it would be the world's dearest rail line. Well, here we've got International Business Times saying HS2 rail project puts lives of 200 reindeer at risk, so perhaps it is the world's dearest. But, you know, we've got the situation where in Britain we cannot build a real high-speed, a proper high-speed railway, because HS2 is only going to run at 150 miles an hour, something like that. Whereas in Morocco, which is considered a third world country by relative standards, they are building TGV, which is going to run at 200 miles an hour. And you've got to say that part of this, or at least I feel that part of this is the general demoralization and negativity that there is over industry and product production and manufacturing in this country, which really has been driven through the media and particularly the BBC ever since they stopped the Tomorrow's World programme, for example. What are your thoughts?
As an element in that, it's obviously very complex because there's so many moving parts. But if you compare the policy now with, which is essentially a kind of low-grade 1970s socialism with a lot of PR on the top of it, we're propping up things. We're reproducing a slightly better version of 19th century technology. If you look at what we did in the 30s, we balanced the budget, right? So there was none of this deficit spending nonsense, which simply sucks out investment capital from the rest of industry. We balanced the budget. We cut social programs to the bone. We cut everything to the bone. But when there was investment, it was focused very much on the coming technology. At that time, it was cars, aircraft. We invested as a nation. If there was anything centrally planned and centrally driven, and this comes back to what David Ellis was saying yesterday, it was focused on the very cutting edge, the very new, to put us as a nation at the forefront of the technological race worldwide. Not vastly expensive railways that are not at all innovative.
Yep.
It was pushing the new technology. And if we're going to be centrally planning and centrally mobilizing anything, and there's a question as to whether we should, but if we're going to do anything, it must be moving the whole country forward in terms of our technical ability.
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more with that. But I'm going to add an opinion, and I'm going to say that the industry in Britain has been deliberately collapsed by deliberate government policy over a great many years. If you say, well, why would they want to do that? In my opinion, it would be to ensure that UK is sufficiently weakened so as not to be able to interfere with the European project. And our focus on the military unification within the EU is a sign that that supranational state is still being built by the day. But if you think the government is going to stop at the fact we don't have any jobs or we can't earn from the jobs that we've got, the next step is that private property is going to be stripped away. Now, Mike, I think you've mentioned this before in the past. This is a policy that's been drifting around in the background.
It actually made it into the manifesto at one point, and then because of the backlash, it was dropped. But it doesn't seem to have been.
It hasn't been dropped. This is quite interesting text here. It says that Jackie Doyle-Price, the social care minister, said that younger workers who paid for their university tuition and who do not own property should not have to pay for the rising social care costs of a more fortunate generation through their taxes. This is obscene stuff. This is getting children to blame their parents for the fact that the government has put them all into debt through tuition fees. And if anybody's any doubt as to where this is going, the UK column at the moment has been receiving a lot of information about people who are having to go into residential homes or nursing homes as a result of their age and maybe some medical or health need. And what is happening in the background is that social services are putting charges on their houses, and it's quite clear that the intent is that social services and local authorities are literally going to steal that property from these very vulnerable elderly people. And let us remember that David Cameron has said publicly, boasted almost, that there would be 1.2 million people suffering from dementia by 2040. This is going to be a massive attack on the ownership of private property. David, this is very dark stuff.
And catastrophic on many levels, because the one thing that is the most key to building a successful economy is secure ownership of private property. If you take that out, if you remove that underpinning, everything goes, as Venezuela has shown, because that was the key decision they made there. Let's start seizing private property for state purposes, and the economy collapsed very rapidly and very completely to levels where you're now seeing people lose enormous amounts of weight because there's simply not enough to eat.
Okay, quick ad once again for Media on Trial from Stop Wars event taking place on Thursday next week at the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. John Pilger speaking, Peter Ford, Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, Piers Robinson, Robert Stewart, Tim Hayward. Get along to that if you possibly can. It is going to be a very interesting evening. Now, moving on, David. Peter Cherby's blog, A Diary of Injustice in Scotland. Tell us what he's talking about this week.
This is a remarkable story. It dates back to last year. There's a very powerful international law firm called Clyde & Co. Now they turn over billions, and they have thousands of lawyers all around the world. They're extremely well connected. Police Scotland were going to raid their Edinburgh office. They turned up with a search warrant, and they were stalled, and the law firm went off to challenge the search warrant. And this became before Lord Brodie. And Lord Brodie decided to block the warrant on the grounds that the evidence that was in the safe of the law firm, which is evidence of child sexual abuse by a well-connected client, was in fact privileged information, and the police were not going to get it. And he also, part of his judgment was that the information was time-barred, a time bar which has subsequently been withdrawn by the Scottish Parliament. Or is in the process of being withdrawn, rather. So that case fell apart. The case gathering, the police gathering information, the Crown Office gathering information against this well-connected person who's accused of abusing children is dead in the water. And it now transpires that there's money going from, well, us, the taxpayer, to the law firm and presumably to the alleged abuser. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service paid over £10,000 to the law firm to cover their legal and other costs. And oddly, Police Scotland, who normally spend around £70,000 a year with this law firm buying their expertise, that year spent £213,933.24 with that particular law firm, Clyde & Co. So there seems to be a lot of cash going into Clyde & Co. Surrounding this event. So we appear to be now subsidising the abusers.
This is quite well, sorry, I'm lost for words, really. This is staggering, isn't it? A judge is effectively stopping the police from doing their job in an investigation on the basis that this is confidential information within that law firm. Privileged, yeah, thank you for that, Mike. So basically, we've now got law firms above the law because they could hold, well, what could they hold, supposing they had information of treason by the highest politicians in the land? But don't worry, it's in their safe, so not a problem.
Well, this is it, yes. Is there any limit on the power of these large law firms? And these are international law firms, so they go, they're multi-jurisdictional as well. So if you can afford this sort of representation, what does that buy you? What sort of immunity is purchased by this means? It's very concerning.
Yeah. Okay, now a subject we haven't mentioned until now was Mr. Weinstein. So, David, what are your thoughts on this? We've got a couple of articles here. The Oscars Academy to hold an emergency meeting over Harvey Weinstein's future. Weinstein Company bankruptcy threat because they're losing clients. And the fallout from it is Amazon is suspending one of their staff for what appear to be similar allegations. So what are your thoughts on what's been going on around this case?
Well, my thoughts are, what is the story here? Because it's huge, and it's all of a sudden, this was a man who could do anything to anyone. I understand he assaulted a journalist in broad daylight in New York City, and people took photographs, nothing ever appeared. He seemed to be immune, he seemed to be extremely powerful, and all of a sudden he's not. All of a sudden it's open season. So that's puzzling. But there's a whole lot of other questions that come forward. The mainstream media told us nothing about this for years. Right? This was a man who was called God by Meryl Streep in one of the big awards ceremonies. everyone was playing along that he was wonderful, and no one told us anything. So one of the stories is the mainstream media cover this stuff up because I'm sure they knew. They're not reporting the news. Another one is he's a major donor. 1.4 million to Hillary Clinton's campaign over the years.
It's all right though, because she said she'll donate that to charity now.
Oh, well, okay, that's fine. Yes. So, another part of this story is how much protection does political donation buy you? Perhaps quite a lot. There is. He was also the man that said that the Hollywood had the best moral compass, that they could tell us what right and wrong was. We didn't need a church with Hollywood, with the movie industry. Well, that's looking a bit threadbare. And one of the things that's happening here that might be enormously significant is the culture war, because politics and policy is all downstream from culture. Is this an indication that these people are losing the culture war? I think perhaps it is.
Well, that's an interesting question, David. I wonder whether... I beg your pardon,
we're not there yet. We've got a little bit more.
I wonder whether this is part of a cover-up to distract people from Heath, which I'm going to come on to, but I know you've got a bit more to cover on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise one more thing, and that was these tweets, one from The Independent and one from Newsweek, so both sides of the Atlantic, both similar content. Director Oliver Stone defends Harvey Weinstein, and in the case of Newsweek, it was Oliver Stone, fan of strongman leaders, defends Harvey Weinstein as condemned by a vigilante system. What Stone actually said was, I'm a believer that you wait until this thing gets to trial. I believe a man shouldn't be condemned by a vigilante system. It's not easy what he's going through either. During that period, he was a rival. I never did business with him and I didn't really know him. I've heard horror stories on everyone in the in the business, so I'm not going to comment on gossip. I'll wait and see which is the right thing to do. So maybe I'm misreading that, but I don't really see that as a defense of Harvey Weinstein at all. What he's saying is we wait and see if this goes to trial and if he's convicted of anything, and then maybe we can comment. Now, the question in that sort of follows on from what you were saying, David, is we've seen with some of these cases quite a bit of furore in the media, and what seems to me to be building here is an effort to suggest that really somebody can't have a fair trial as a result of the noise in the media, and we've heard this being mentioned by politicians and others in the past, that perhaps this stuff shouldn't be being reported in the media at all, and that would be my fear. Of course, from a judicial point of view, everybody's entitled to be considered innocent until proven guilty, and the massive noise that's in the mainstream media over this at the moment, it seems to me, could well be damaging any possibility that there could be a fair trial in this. So how do you see that?
You see, the issue of a fair trial is if there's a fair system backing it up. What we learned in Scotland from the Robert Greene Holly Gregg case is there is no investigation, there is no trial, there is no justice, there is no nothing. And then if you speak out, you're targeted for speaking out. You get the trial. Thank you very much for playing Do We Defend Our Children? And you go to jail. So the attack on the ability of people to raise concerns is one that I view with a great deal of suspicion. Now, in terms of the difference between a concern, between a report and something that's proved beyond reasonable doubt, I think as a society we just have to man up and realise that's a different thing, and appreciate that there's two different standards of proof, there's two different situations being looked at here, and I wouldn't want the one to shut down the other in either direction.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, talking of justice, let's get on to back on the subject of the accusations against Ted Heath. Of course, it's gone pretty quiet overall. I just want to recap on this lady that we spoke about a few days ago. She'd written what I thought was a very apologetic story for Ted Heath. Is Ted Heath's reputation the victim of a flawed system? Poor Mr. Heath there, he's just a nice man who played the piano. We said, well, why would she tread so carefully with the Conservative Party? And it didn't take us long to see that she was very closely connected with the Conservative Party and organisations that they're promoting. Somebody kindly picked up on this and said, well, actually, this woman is a little bit deeper than that because, of course, she's been connected with Demos. And the moment we're looking at Demos, we're actually getting back into the fact, are we dealing with a journalist here, or are we dealing with a, quote, a change agent? So this lady's been involved with a whole series of different things. She's been a lead writer at The Observer. She's worked with Which. She's been in the Small Business Task Force. She's been Dartington Social Research Unit, Demos, and the Institute for Public Policy Research. So we really got a question when this lady is writing an article and she's clearly trying to defend Ted Heath. Is she doing that because it's journalism, or is she doing that because it's policy? And of course, the lines are very blurred now. We don't know what's going on here because we don't quite know what we're dealing with. But if you've never heard of Dartington Social Research Unit, encourage you to start to have a little look into what's going on here. I've been fascinated by this little, I'll call it a cell based in Dartington in Devon. We reimagine the way services and public systems are designed and delivered in order to improve the lives of children, families and communities. Who are these people and where does their money come from that they are helping the government set policy? It's fascinating stuff. If you have a look at the history here, 2000 I picked up because this bit I thought was quite pertinent. This decade sees the unit support a series of major local government philanthropic investment strategies in evidence-based prevention and early intervention in the UK and internationally. 40 years of research in childcare policy and practice is published in 2005. Reviewing post contributions of the unit and considering what more needs to be done. I don't get a warm feeling from this, David. I think we're looking at people who are very closely involved with policy around children, but they're producing that policy in the shadows. Is this where the named person scheme came from?
Well, they were heavily involved with it. They were doing a lot of the background research. And they were the people who were literally chased out of town when they started asking creepy questions in an Ayrshire town about children and how many children live in the house. They were pursued down the street by some angry locals in a wonderful moment for liberty. And I see they're still being quoted extensively in information coming out of the Scottish Government. For example, a January 2016 paper called Ready to Act, which is a transformational plan for children and young people, their parents, carers and families who require support from allied health professionals. So it's quite up front. It's the children and their families and their parents who are going to be changed. And Dartington are very, very involved in what that change is going to be, providing the research and justification for it, and propelling it along. Yeah.
People are going to be changed. That was your expression. And of course, his UK column is one of the few media outlets that is warning about the government's Behavioural Insights programme, applied behavioural psychology to change our views. And of course, we've only got to go back to the time that the government ministers were supporting PI, the Paedophile Information Exchange, and PAL, Paedophile Action for Liberty, where paedophiles were trying to get a pro-child abuse agenda into the heart of government. So have we got other individuals who would like to see, I think, man, boy, love, is it, or something along that we've got in the States, but we're seeing a steady progress to people who think it should be acceptable for there to be sexual relations between adults and children. The press, very, very heavy on the Heath case. We showed this, Times again, Dominic Lawson. He said, well, the whole thing is really David Icke. David Icke did happen to say that Heath was a child abuser while Heath was alive, but Heath didn't do anything because, well, the old boy couldn't be bothered, Mike. We've now got this one. This disgraceful chief constable must quit. So here we are, another Times journalist hammering Mike Veal for doing his job as a chief constable. And this article is about the rest of us and why we should care. I believe the Wiltshire Police is engaged in a scandalous misuse of its power and authority, and that should bother anyone who cares about civil liberties. Those nasty police, Mike, did their job. We've got to be very frightened because they've actually been investigating child abuse.
But aside from that, the implication here is that Wiltshire Police was acting on its own. But in fact, Wiltshire Police was acting. The operation was being run with the approval of the National Police Chiefs Council.
Indeed, and we'll give them a little mention in a minute. But first to the Home Office, because I wondered whether I'd missed any form of statement from the Home Office since the Wiltshire Police Edward Heath abuse report has been released. I gave them a call this morning and, well, surprise, surprise, there's actually been no response from the Home Office. The person at the other end was quite helpful, but they said, no, we haven't made any comment on it whatsoever. So here we are moving along a path that a former British Prime Minister was abusing children. The Home Office doesn't think it's worthy of comment. What does the Home Office think is worthy of comment? Well, they've suddenly got very big on we need more regulations on air rifles. And I think, David, that was a topic that was picked up in Scotland a couple of years ago when all of a sudden there was, we don't want any of those nasty Scottish people owning an air rifle because that could be dangerous.
Oh, yeah. So air rifles are now very heavily controlled in Scotland. You have to have a license, and you're not allowed to have any weapons for home defence or self-defence, even though that is a common law right. And I know one or two people have been asking the authorities questions along this line and not having very many answers.
No answers. So we're seeing at the moment everything's very quiet. Well, I also spoke to the National Police Chief Council this morning to ask them whether there was any formal response to the Wiltshire Police investigation. I was asked if I'd follow it up with an email, which I did. This is the email that I sent. And I'm going to say that I didn't receive an email back in time, but I have been informed, or that I saw, let's qualify this, I didn't see an email back, but I understand there is now an email in where they're saying, no, we haven't made any comment so far, but we are going to provide comment for the UK column. So just fascinating that the organisation which is there to support policing in the UK doesn't make any comment on the Veal investigation, all of the hard work by Mike Veal, Chief Constable. And of course, the NPCC doesn't make any comment about the pressure and abuse which Mike Veal had to face in doing his job. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see what the NPCC comes back with. But isn't it fascinating? It's taken the UK column to challenge these two authorities as to their silence over the Ted Heath investigation. Where do we go? Well, I think we'll end on Friday the 13th. Let's come through to this one. I'm going to say thank you very much to one of our viewers who spotted this. This is Cornwall Live, and the headline is Friday the 13th, Superstitions and Legends Explained by Experts at the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. And the inset image there is Friday the 13th, American horror franchise with films and books and TV shows, all good stuff being pushed out. And then it hops across to the Museum of Witchcraft, and the central item is the using of, quote, poppets, dolls for ritual magic. And so a major article on the use of dolls in order to cast spells, malevolent spells on people. And that links us through to the work of a certain university professor. And here she is, Dr. Louise Fenton. And let's have a look at what this lady is specialising in. Well, she's a writer, illustrator and cultural historian. Following her first degree in illustration from Wolverhampton Polytechnic, Louise has completed an MA in illustration from the University of Wolverhampton, but she's moved towards the representation of marginalised cultures. She completed a PhD on the representations of voodoo. Now, I don't know what that is, whether that is voodoo.
It is, yeah.
It is voodoo. In 2010, she's now a senior lecturer in contextual studies. Recent research has focused on the visual and literary representations of otherness, including voodoo, witchcraft, and zombies. So we're now into what our young people are being taught. And just before I give the final word to David, if you're not sure about otherness, you might like to have a look at this lady's website, Other Sociologist. And this is an explanation embedded in this one. Can I read it very quickly? In dichotomies crucial for the practice and the vision of social order, the differentiating power hides as a rule behind one of the members of the opposition. The second member is but the other of the first, the opposite, degraded, suppressed, exiled side of the first and its creation. Thus, abnormality is the other of the norm, woman the other of man, stranger the other of the native, enemy the other of friend, them the other of us. And David, I don't know whether you understand that. I don't understand it fully, but I don't get a good feeling about this type of material being taught in universities to our sons, daughters, young people.
Indeed, I was watching a film from shot at an American university this morning, where there were two groups protesting for and against abortion. There was a pro-life group, which is largely a Christian organisation on campus, and opposing them there was two groups. There was the pro-choice team and there was the Satanist students, and they were joining hands and shouting obscenities. And we talked about culture war. Well, this is the nature of the culture war, and also Heath and everything that Heath got up to is very much into this dark, very frightening, very, very threatening area, and it needs to be exposed, and that's what our press is meant to be doing. Danny DeFink, Finkelstein et al. Are not doing their job.
Absolutely not. So remember the media on trial advert that we've shown you in this news. We'll end there. We'll also say don't be spooked by Friday the 13th. As Robert Greene has said on many occasions, of course, the people doing the nastiest things are absolute cowards because they hide in the darkness. So if we want to deal with this, we need to get this subject out into the open. We need to be talking about it, and we need to be challenging the authorities. David, thank you very much for joining us. That's it for UK Column News today. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, please subscribe. We need your financial support to do what we do, and also hopefully to expand, because certainly the BBC on its £3.74 billion budget does need some decent competition. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.